Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, where we explore the fascinating yet soothing details of our past. Tonight, we're stepping into the sweltering heat of a medieval forge, where sparks fly and hammers ring against red-hot iron. But don't worry about the noise. We'll keep things calm and peaceful as we discover the surprisingly brutal reality of blacksmiths in medieval times. Picture this. It's dawn in a 13th century village, and while most people are just beginning their day, the blacksmith has already been working for hours. His hands are permanently stained black from coal dust, his arms scarred from countless burns, and his back aches from years of swinging heavy hammers. This isn't the romanticized image we often see in movies. This is the harsh, demanding life of one of medieval society's most essential craftsmen. From the moment they began their apprenticeship as young boys to their final days bent over glowing coals, blacksmiths endured physical hardships that would challenge even the strongest among us today. Their work was dangerous, their hours were long, and their bodies paid the price for keeping medieval civilization running. Tonight, we'll explore every aspect of their demanding existence, from the grueling 7-year apprenticeships to the constant threat of injury and death that shadowed their every working moment. To understand the brutal reality of medieval blacksmiths, we must first journey back to a time when the clang of hammer on anvil echoed through every village across Europe. The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, was an era where iron and steel shaped not just tools and weapons, but the very fabric of society itself. In the early medieval period, around the 6th and 7th centuries, blacksmithing was still emerging from the shadows of Roman collapse. The sophisticated metallurgy of the Roman Empire had crumbled along with its roads and aqueducts, leaving behind scattered communities that desperately needed to rebuild their technological foundations. It was during this dark age that the blacksmith began to assume an almost mythical status in society. The Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf, composed sometime between the 8th and 11th centuries, gives us glimpses of how these early medieval societies viewed metalworkers. The creation of weapons and tools was seen as almost magical, with smiths often portrayed as having supernatural abilities. This wasn't mere poetic license. In a world where the difference between a well-forged sword and a poorly made one could mean the difference between life and death in battle, the blacksmith's skills were literally matters of survival. As we move into the high medieval period, roughly the 11th to 13th centuries, the role of the blacksmith became increasingly complex and demanding. The feudal system that dominated European society created a rigid hierarchy where everyone had their place, and the blacksmith occupied a unique position within this structure. Unlike serfs who were bound to the land, blacksmiths possessed skills that made them valuable to lords and peasants alike. The medieval manor system, which formed the backbone of rural life, typically included a blacksmith's workshop as one of its essential components. These workshops, usually located near the manor house, but safely away from other buildings due to fire risk, became the beating heart of medieval technology. Here, the blacksmith would spend his days hunched over glowing coals, his face illuminated by the orange glow of the forge, sweat streaming down his soot-covered body as he shaped the metal that would determine the fate of his community. The tools of the medieval blacksmith were deceptively simple, yet required years to master. The forge itself was typically a stone hearth with a bellows system, often operated by an apprentice or family member, that could reach temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The anvil, weighing anywhere from 100 to 500 pounds, was the blacksmith's most prized possession, often passed down through generations and treated with an almost religious reverence. Hammers came in various sizes and weights, each designed for specific tasks. The heavy sledgehammer for drawing out long pieces of iron, the lighter cross-peen hammer for detailed work, and the ball-peen hammer for riveting and shaping. Tongs, essential for handling red-hot metal, came in dozens of varieties, each crafted by the blacksmith himself to suit particular tasks. The hardy hole in the anvil could accommodate various tools: swage blocks for shaping curves, fullers for creating grooves, and punches for making holes. But perhaps the most crucial tool was the blacksmith's eye, his ability to judge the color of heated metal and know exactly when it reached the proper temperature for working. This skill, developed through years of painful trial and error, could mean the difference between creating a masterpiece and ruining hours of work. The spectrum of heat colors, from black heat at around 750 degrees to white heat at over 2,000 degrees, became as familiar to the blacksmith as the alphabet is to a scholar. The social position of blacksmiths in medieval society was paradoxical. On one hand, they were essential craftsmen whose skills were desperately needed. On the other hand, they were often viewed with suspicion and fear. The ability to transform raw metal into tools and weapons through fire seemed almost supernatural to medieval minds. This association with fire and transformation led to connections with both divine creation and demonic sorcery in the popular imagination. In many medieval communities, the blacksmith held a status somewhere between the peasant farmers and the minor nobility. They were typically free men, not bound to the land like serfs, but they were also not part of the warrior class that dominated medieval society. This liminal position meant that blacksmiths had to navigate complex social relationships, serving lords who might look down on manual labor, while depending on peasants who couldn't afford to pay for their services. The guild system, which began to emerge in the 12th century, provided blacksmiths with some protection and organization. These medieval trade associations regulated everything from apprenticeship requirements to pricing standards. The guild system also helped maintain quality control. A poorly made horseshoe or farming tool could have devastating consequences for a community's survival. Guild membership provided social status and economic protection, but it also imposed strict rules about how business could be conducted. Apprenticeship in medieval blacksmithing was a grueling process that typically began when a boy was between 12 and 14 years old. The apprentice would live in the master's household, often sleeping in the workshop itself, surrounded by the tools and materials of the trade. For the first several years, the apprentice's duties were largely menial: maintaining the fire, working the bellows, cleaning tools, and preparing materials. Only gradually would he be allowed to handle the hammer and begin learning the intricate skills of metalworking. The progression from apprentice to journeyman typically took 7 years, though this could vary depending on the complexity of the work and the apprentice's natural ability. During this time, the young blacksmith would learn not just the physical techniques of metalworking, but also the business aspects of the trade: how to judge the quality of raw materials, how to price finished goods, and how to manage relationships with customers and suppliers. The raw materials that medieval blacksmiths worked with presented their own challenges. Iron ore had to be smelted in bloomeries, primitive furnaces that produced a spongy mass of iron called a bloom. This bloom contained significant amounts of slag and impurities that had to be hammered out through repeated heating and folding. The process was labor-intensive and wasteful, with much of the original ore ending up as unusable slag. Steel, the superior material for weapons and cutting tools, was even more difficult to produce. Medieval blacksmiths had to carefully control the carbon content of their iron through a process called carburization. This involved heating iron in contact with carbon-rich materials like charcoal for extended periods, allowing carbon atoms to diffuse into the iron's crystal structure. Too little carbon resulted in soft iron, unsuitable for weapons. Too much created brittle cast iron that would shatter under stress. The economic reality of medieval blacksmithing was harsh and unforgiving. Most blacksmiths worked on a barter system, trading their services for food, clothing, and raw materials, rather than receiving monetary payment. A typical transaction might involve shoeing a farmer's horse in exchange for grain, or repairing farming tools in return for a portion of the harvest. This system meant that blacksmiths were intimately connected to the agricultural cycles that dominated medieval life. During harvest season, blacksmiths might work around the clock repairing sickles, scythes, and other harvesting tools. A broken tool during this critical time could mean the difference between a successful harvest and starvation for an entire family. The pressure on blacksmiths during these peak periods was immense, as they juggled multiple urgent repairs while dealing with customers who might become desperate or even violent if their tools weren't ready in time. The seasonal nature of medieval agriculture also meant that blacksmiths had to plan carefully for lean periods. Winter months, when agricultural work slowed, might provide time for larger projects like creating new tools or weapons. But they also meant reduced income and increased difficulty in obtaining food and fuel for the forge. The path to becoming a blacksmith began in childhood, typically around age 12 or 13, when families would bind their sons to master smiths through formal apprenticeship contracts. These agreements, often lasting 7 to 10 years, essentially transferred ownership of the child from parent to master, creating a relationship that was part education, part indentured servitude. The apprentice's first months were spent far from the forge, performing the most menial tasks imaginable. They swept floors covered in metal shavings and coal dust, hauled water from wells that might be hundreds of yards away, and spent countless hours simply watching the master work. The forge was considered too dangerous for untrained hands, and apprentices who dared approach without permission faced swift and often brutal punishment. Young apprentices learned that their new life revolved entirely around the rhythm of the forge. They woke before dawn to prepare the fire, using techniques passed down through generations. The coal had to be arranged just so, with the right mixture of charcoal and mineral coal to achieve the proper temperature. Too much air through the bellows would create a fire too hot and wasteful, while too little would result in metal that wouldn't heat properly. The bellows themselves required constant attention and considerable strength. These massive leather contraptions, often taller than the apprentices operating them, demanded a steady, rhythmic pumping motion that could continue for hours. The apprentices' arms would ache, their backs would spasm, but stopping meant the fire would die, and the master's work would be ruined. Such failures resulted in beatings, withheld meals, or extended working hours as punishment. Food was another constant concern for apprentices. Most contracts specified that the master would provide meals, but the quality and quantity were often barely adequate. Apprentices typically ate porridge made from whatever grains were cheapest, occasionally supplemented with scraps of bread or thin soup. Meat was a luxury reserved for special occasions, or when the master's business was particularly profitable. The sleeping arrangements reflected the apprentice's low status in the household hierarchy. Most slept in the workshop itself, on straw mattresses placed near the forge for warmth. The acrid smell of coal smoke and metal dust permeated everything, making restful sleep nearly impossible. In winter, the dying embers of the forge provided the only heat, while summer brought stifling temperatures that made the workshop feel like an oven even at night. After months of basic labor, apprentices gradually earned the right to handle simple tools. They learned to sort iron stock by quality, recognizing the subtle differences in color and texture that indicated good metal from poor. This knowledge was crucial, as using inferior iron could ruin hours of work and waste precious materials. The apprentice's mistakes during this learning phase often meant working late into the night to correct errors or replace ruined pieces. The first actual metalworking tasks were deliberately mundane but essential. apprentices learned to make nails, thousands upon thousands of them, each one requiring precise hammer strikes to create a proper head and point. This repetitive work served multiple purposes. It built the muscle memory necessary for more complex tasks, developed the hand-eye coordination essential for precision work, and provided a steady income stream for the master's shop. Making nails might seem simple, but it required mastering fundamental techniques that would serve throughout a blacksmith's career. The apprentice had to learn how to heat the iron rod to exactly the right temperature, judge when the metal was ready for shaping, and deliver hammer blows with consistent force and accuracy. Too soft, a strike would fail to shape the metal properly, while too hard would cause the iron to crack or split. The hammer itself became an extension of the apprentice's body through countless hours of practice. Different hammers served different purposes: heavy sledgehammers for rough shaping, lighter crossbeam hammers for drawing out metal, and specialized tools for creating specific textures or patterns. Learning to switch between these tools fluidly while maintaining rhythm and precision took years to master. Beyond the physical skills, apprentices had to develop an almost supernatural sensitivity to the behavior of heated metal. They learned to read the color changes that indicated temperature, from the dull red heat suitable for gentle bending to the bright orange glow needed for heavy forging. This knowledge came only through experience, as thermometers wouldn't be invented for centuries. The master's teaching methods were often harsh by modern standards. Mistakes were corrected with sharp words, withheld privileges, or physical punishment. The medieval mindset viewed such treatment as necessary for proper learning, believing that comfort bred laziness, and that only through hardship could true skill be developed. Apprentices who showed promise might receive slightly better treatment, but even the most talented faced years of grueling work. As apprentices progressed, they were gradually introduced to more complex projects. They might assist in making horseshoes, holding the hot iron steady while the master shaped the curves, or operating the bellows with precise timing during delicate work. These collaborative efforts taught them about the social aspects of smithing, as most complex projects required coordination between multiple workers. The apprentice's social position within the community was carefully defined and strictly maintained. They were expected to show deference not only to their master, but to all full craftsmen, customers, and even the master's family members. Speaking out of turn, showing disrespect, or failing to follow proper protocols could result in extension of the apprenticeship term, or even expulsion from the trade entirely. Religious instruction formed another crucial component of apprentice training. The church played a central role in medieval life, and blacksmiths' guilds were often associated with specific patron saints. Apprentices learned prayers appropriate to their trade, participated in religious festivals, and understood their work as part of God's divine plan. This spiritual dimension provided meaning and context to their daily struggles. progression from simple tasks to complex work followed a carefully structured path. After mastering nails, apprentices might graduate to making simple tools like chisels or punches. Each new skill built upon previous knowledge, creating a foundation of techniques that would serve them throughout their careers. The master carefully monitored this progression, ensuring that apprentices didn't advance too quickly and develop bad habits. Years into their training, apprentices began to understand the business aspects of smithing. They learned about the cost of materials, the time required for different projects, and the importance of maintaining good relationships with suppliers and customers. This knowledge was as crucial as technical skills, as even the most talented smith would fail without proper business acumen. The emotional toll of apprenticeship was considerable. Young boys, separated from their families and thrust into a demanding adult world, often struggled with homesickness, exhaustion, and the constant pressure to perform. Many apprentices never completed their training, either running away or being dismissed for inadequate performance. Those who persevered developed not only technical skills, but also the mental toughness necessary for a lifetime in this demanding trade. As apprentices neared the end of their training, they began to work with increasing independence. They might be trusted to complete simple projects from start to finish, always under the master's watchful eye. These final years were crucial for developing the confidence and judgment that would serve them as journeymen and eventually as masters themselves. The blacksmith's day began before dawn, when the world was still shrouded in darkness, and the only sounds were the distant crow of roosters and the soft rustling of straw beneath restless feet. There was no luxury of sleeping in, no leisurely morning routine. The forge demanded attention, and the blacksmith's livelihood depended on maximizing every precious hour of daylight. Rising from his straw mattress, often shared with his wife and children in their cramped quarters above or beside the workshop, the blacksmith would first tend to the most crucial element of his trade, fire. The forge fire was the heart of his operation, and it required constant care and attention. Like a living thing, it needed to be fed, nurtured, and maintained throughout the day. The process of rekindling the forge fire was both an art and a science. Using the glowing embers that had been carefully banked the night before, the blacksmith would slowly coax the flames back to life. This involved adding small pieces of charcoal, adjusting the bellows to provide just the right amount of air, and gradually building the fire to the intense heat required for metalworking. The temperature needed to reach nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to make iron malleable and workable. While the fire built to its working temperature, the blacksmith would prepare his tools and workspace. Each hammer, tong, and anvil had its specific place and purpose. The anvil, weighing anywhere from 100 to 400 pounds, was positioned at the optimal height for the blacksmith's work. Too high, and he would tire quickly from reaching up. Too low, and his back would ache from bending over. The surface of the anvil was kept meticulously clean and smooth, as any imperfection would transfer to the metal being worked. The bellows system required constant attention throughout the day. In smaller forges, the blacksmith himself operated the bellows, using a hand-pumped leather apparatus that forced air into the fire. Larger operations might employ an apprentice or even a water-powered mechanism, but the principle remained the same, maintaining the precise airflow necessary to keep the fire at working temperature. Too little air, and the fire would die down. Too much, and valuable fuel would be wasted, and the fire might become too hot to control effectively. Once the forge reached working temperature, the real labor began. The blacksmith's day was structured around the rhythm of heating, hammering, and reshaping metal. Iron had to be heated to a bright orange or yellow glow before it became malleable enough to work. This meant constant trips between the forge and the anvil, a distance of just a few steps, but one that would be traveled hundreds of times throughout the day. The physical demands of the work were extraordinary. Each swing of the hammer required the blacksmith to engage his entire body, from his feet planted firmly on the ground to his shoulders and arms delivering the blow. A typical hammer weighed between 2 and 4 pounds, and a skilled blacksmith might deliver thousands of hammer blows in a single day. The repetitive motion, combined with the intense heat and the need for precision, created a unique form of physical stress that few other occupations could match. The workspace itself was a carefully organized chaos. Hot metal sparked and glowed, sending tiny fragments flying through the air. The constant hammering created a rhythmic percussion that could be heard throughout the village. Smoke and steam rose from the quenching barrel, where hot metal was plunged into water or oil to cool and harden. The smell of burning charcoal, hot metal, and occasionally singed hair or cloth permeated everything. Different types of work required different approaches and timing. Simple items like nails or horseshoe nails could be produced in relative quantity, with the blacksmith developing efficient techniques for rapid production. More complex items like tools, weapons, or decorative pieces required careful planning and execution. The blacksmith had to visualize the final product and work backward, determining the sequence of heating, hammering, and shaping required to achieve the desired result. The heat was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the daily routine. Working next to a forge that maintained temperatures of nearly 2,000 degrees meant that the blacksmith was constantly exposed to intense, radiant heat. In summer, this could be nearly unbearable. The combination of physical exertion and extreme heat led to profuse sweating, dehydration, and exhaustion. Many blacksmiths developed a tolerance for heat that seemed almost superhuman to outsiders. But this came at a cost to their overall health and comfort. Fuel management was a constant concern throughout the day. Charcoal was expensive and had to be used efficiently. The blacksmith learned to judge exactly how how much fuel was needed for each task, how to bank the fire during brief breaks, and how to maintain consistent temperature with minimal waste. Running out of fuel in the middle of a complex piece meant starting over, wasting both time and materials. The work was not continuous hammering. Between the intense periods of shaping hot metal, there were moments of preparation and planning. The blacksmith might spend time drawing wire, cutting stock material to length, or preparing specialized tools for upcoming projects. These quieter moments provided brief respites from the most physically demanding aspects of the work, but they were still productive time that contributed to the overall efficiency of the operation. Apprentices, when available, played crucial roles in the daily routine. They might operate the bellows, maintain the fire, organize tools, or handle simpler tasks like nail making. However, the master blacksmith remained responsible for all the skilled work and for training the apprentices. This meant that in addition to his physical labor, he was also teaching, supervising, and ensuring quality control throughout the day. The rhythm of the work was punctuated by the needs of customers. A farmer might arrive with a broken plow that needed immediate repair. A housewife might need a cooking pot mended. The local lord might commission a decorative piece or weapons for his guards. Each interruption required the blacksmith to assess the urgency of the request, estimate the time required, and fit the work into his existing schedule. Quality control was an ongoing concern throughout the day. Each piece had to meet specific standards of strength, durability, and function. A poorly made horseshoe could lame a valuable animal. A weak tool might break at a critical moment. The blacksmith's reputation depended on consistently producing reliable, well-made items. This meant carefully inspecting each piece, testing joints and connections, and sometimes remaking items that didn't meet standards. As the day progressed, fatigue became an increasingly significant factor. The combination of heat, physical exertion, and concentration took its toll. Mistakes became more likely as tiredness set in. Burns and injuries were more common when reflexes slowed and attention wavered. The skilled blacksmith learned to recognize when fatigue was affecting his work and to adjust his tasks accordingly, perhaps shifting to less demanding work or taking brief breaks to maintain quality and safety. The end of the working day didn't come with the setting sun, but rather when the blacksmith's body could no longer maintain the pace, or when the available light made precision work impossible. Banking the fire for the night was as important as lighting it in the morning. The coals had to be arranged and covered so they would maintain enough heat to restart easily the next day, but not so much that they would burn through the night and waste precious fuel. This daily routine, repeated 6 days a week, with only Sunday offering respite, created a life of extraordinary physical demand and social importance. The blacksmith's work rhythm became the heartbeat of medieval village life, marking time with the steady percussion of hammer on anvil and the rhythmic whoosh of the bellows feeding the eternal flame. The romanticized image of the village blacksmith as a robust, healthy figure masks a harsh reality. The physical demands of metalworking extracted a devastating toll on the human body, creating a profession where chronic pain, disability, and premature death were not exceptions, but expected outcomes. The most immediate and visible consequence of blacksmithing was the transformation of the body itself. Years of swinging heavy hammers developed asymmetrical muscle growth, with the dominant arm becoming grotesquely enlarged, while the supporting arm remained comparatively weak. This imbalance created chronic shoulder problems as the body struggled to compensate for the uneven distribution of muscle mass. The repetitive motion of hammering caused what we now recognize as repetitive strain injuries, though medieval blacksmiths had no such medical understanding. They simply endured the constant ache in their joints, the stiffness that made morning movement agony, and the gradual loss of fine motor control in their hands and fingers. The forge itself was a source of numerous health hazards. The intense heat required to work iron and steel meant that blacksmiths worked in temperatures that often exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit, even in winter. This constant exposure to extreme heat led to chronic dehydration, heat exhaustion, and a condition known as forge fever, a state of perpetual overheating that left smiths pale, weak, and prone to fainting. Burns were an inevitable part of the profession. Every blacksmith bore the scars of their trade, pockmarked skin from flying sparks, deep burns from accidental contact with hot metal, and the distinctive pattern of small, circular scars that came from years of working with red-hot iron. These weren't minor injuries that healed cleanly. In an age without proper wound care or antibiotics, burns frequently became infected, leading to serious complications or death. The most insidious health threat came from the very air blacksmiths breathed. The forge produced constant clouds of smoke, soot, and metallic particles that filled the workshop. Over years of exposure, these particles accumulated in the lungs, causing what medieval physicians called black lung, a condition that made breathing increasingly difficult and painful. This respiratory damage wasn't limited to coal dust. The process of heating and working different metals released toxic fumes that smiths had no choice but to inhale. Lead, used in various alloys, caused gradual poisoning that manifested as stomach pain, mental confusion, and eventual paralysis. Mercury, employed in certain specialized processes, led to tremors, tooth loss, and psychological disturbances. The physical environment of the smithy compounded these health risks. Most workshops were poorly ventilated, cramped spaces where smiths worked in close proximity to their fires and anvils. The combination of heat, smoke, and confined space created an atmosphere that was barely breathable. Yet smiths had to maintain their concentration and precision while working in these conditions. Eye damage was another inevitable consequence of the profession. The The bright glow of heated metal, combined with the constant exposure to smoke and flying sparks, caused progressive vision problems. Many experienced blacksmiths developed what we would now recognize as cataracts, while others suffered from chronic eye infections that left them partially or completely blind. The noise level in a busy smithy was devastating to hearing. The constant ringing of hammer on anvil, the roar of the bellows, and the hiss of hot metal meeting water created a cacophony that gradually destroyed the delicate structures of the inner ear. Experienced blacksmiths often communicated through hand signals and facial expressions, as their hearing had deteriorated to the point where normal conversation was impossible. Back injuries were endemic among blacksmiths. The work required constant bending over the anvil, lifting heavy pieces of metal, and maintaining awkward positions for extended periods. The lack of ergonomic understanding meant that smiths developed severe spinal problems, including herniated discs and chronic muscle spasms that left them hunched and unable to stand straight. The hands and arms of blacksmiths told the story of their profession in painful detail. Constant gripping of heavy tools led to arthritis that gnarled fingers into claw-like shapes. The vibration from hammering caused nerve damage that left hands numb and unresponsive. Many older smiths could no longer feel the tools they held, relying instead on muscle memory and visual cues to guide their work. Foot and leg injuries were common due to the hazardous nature of the work environment. Dropped tools, falling pieces of hot metal, and the uneven surfaces of dirt floors covered in metal debris created constant dangers. Many smiths worked with permanent limps, missing toes, or feet that had been severely burned and never properly healed. The psychological toll of constant pain and physical deterioration cannot be understated. Medieval blacksmiths often turned to alcohol as their only means of pain relief, leading to additional health problems and shortened lifespans. The combination of physical agony and the mind-numbing effects of chronic alcohol consumption created a cycle of suffering that was difficult to escape. Malnutrition compounded these health problems. The physical demands of blacksmithing required enormous caloric intake, but the irregular income and seasonal nature of agricultural work meant that smiths often couldn't afford adequate nutrition. Working while undernourished accelerated the physical breakdown and made recovery from injuries nearly impossible. Sleep deprivation was another constant companion of the medieval blacksmith. The pain from chronic injuries made restful sleep difficult, while the demands of the profession often required working late into the night to meet deadlines. This chronic exhaustion impaired judgment and coordination, leading to more accidents and injuries in a dangerous profession. The average lifespan of a medieval blacksmith was significantly shorter than that of other craftsmen. While a farmer or merchant might live into their 60s, Most blacksmiths died in their 40s or early 50s, their bodies simply worn out from decades of abuse. Those who survived longer often did so as crippled shadows of their former selves, unable to work and dependent on family or community charity. Women who worked alongside blacksmiths faced additional health risks. Pregnancy, while exposed to toxic fumes and extreme heat, often resulted in miscarriages or birth defects. The physical demands of assisting in the smithy, combined with their other domestic responsibilities, created a burden that few could sustain for long periods. The tools themselves contributed to the physical toll. Medieval hammers were crude, heavy implements that transferred maximum shock to the user's body with each blow. The handles were often poorly balanced, creating additional strain on wrists and elbows. Tongs and other tools were similarly primitive, requiring excessive grip strength and awkward positioning that accelerated joint damage. Seasonal variations in work created their own health challenges. During busy periods, smiths might work 18-hour days for weeks at a time, pushing their bodies beyond reasonable limits. During slow periods, the lack of income meant reduced food intake and inadequate medical care, preventing proper recovery from accumulated injuries. The cumulative effect of these health hazards created a profession where suffering was not just common, but inevitable. Every blacksmith understood that their chosen trade would gradually destroy their body. Yet economic necessity and social expectations demanded that they continue working until they physically could not. This acceptance of inevitable decline shaped not just individual lives, but entire communities that came to view the crippled, scarred blacksmith as a normal part of village life. As we drift toward sleep, consider the price these craftsmen paid for the tools and weapons that built medieval civilization. Their sacrifice was measured not in glory or recognition, but in years of pain, disability, and premature death. A cost that was simply accepted as the price of progress in a harsh and unforgiving world. The blacksmith's arsenal of tools represented generations of accumulated knowledge, each implement carefully designed for specific tasks that demanded both precision and brute force. The hammer, perhaps the most iconic symbol of the trade, came in dozens of varieties, each weighted and shaped for particular operations that required different striking techniques and force distribution. The ball-peen hammer, with its rounded striking surface, allowed smiths to shape metal around curves and create smooth, flowing transitions in their work. Cross-peen hammers, featuring a wedge-shaped head perpendicular to the handle, enabled precise stretching and drawing operations that could transform thick iron stock into delicate, elongated forms. Straight-peen hammers provided the controlled force necessary for creating sharp edges and defined corners in agricultural tools and weapons. Beyond hammers, the anvil served as the blacksmith's primary work surface, its hardened steel face capable of withstanding thousands of hammer blows without deformation. The horn of the anvil, that distinctive curved projection, functioned as a specialized forming tool for creating rings, horseshoes, and curved implements. The hardy hole, a square opening in the anvil's face, accepted various tools that expanded the smith's capabilities exponentially. Tongs represented the blacksmith's extended hands, allowing manipulation of red-hot metal without risking severe burns. Flat-jaw tongs gripped sheet metal and thin stock, while round-jaw tongs handled rods and cylindrical pieces. Specialized tongs existed for specific tasks. Horseshoe tongs for handling curved shoes during fitting, pickup tongs for moving irregularly shaped pieces, and bolt tongs for gripping threaded fasteners during formation. The hardy tools that fit into the anvil's square hole transformed the workspace into a specialized manufacturing center. The cut-off hardy, essentially a sharp chisel mounted in the anvil, allowed smiths to sever hot metal with precise hammer blows. Bending forks provided multiple fulcrum points for creating consistent angles in ironwork. Swage blocks, heavy iron forms with various shaped depressions, enabled the creation of complex three-dimensional shapes that would be impossible to achieve on a flat anvil surface. Files and rasps served as the blacksmith's finishing tools, their hardened steel surfaces capable of removing material and smoothing rough edges with methodical precision. Different file cuts, from coarse bastard files for heavy material removal to smooth files for final finishing, allowed smiths to achieve the exact surface texture required for each application. Draw files, used with a pulling motion rather than pushing, created exceptionally smooth surfaces on knife blades and decorative elements. The quenching process demanded specialized equipment that could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Quench tubs, typically made from oak or other hardwoods, held water, oil, or brine solutions at carefully controlled temperatures. The choice of quenching medium affected the final properties of the steel. Water provided rapid cooling for maximum hardness, but increased the risk of cracking, while oil offered more controlled cooling that reduced stress but might not achieve the desired hardness level. Measuring tools ensured consistency in an era where standardization remained largely theoretical. Calipers, often forged by the blacksmith himself, allowed precise measurement of thickness and diameter. Squares and rulers, typically made from hardened steel, provided reference points for creating right angles and consistent dimensions. These tools represented a significant investment, as their accuracy directly affected the quality and functionality of finished products. The drawing process, fundamental to blacksmith work, involved stretching metal to increase length while reducing cross-sectional area. This technique required careful heat management and precise hammer control to avoid creating weak points or uneven thickness. Smiths developed an intuitive understanding of how different metals responded to drawing, adjusting their technique based on the material's composition and intended use. Setting the opposite of drawing, involved compressing metal to increase thickness while reducing length. This process demanded exceptional skill, as the forces involved could easily cause the metal to buckle or develop internal flaws. Successful upsetting required perfect alignment between hammer, workpiece, and anvil, with each blow carefully calculated to achieve uniform compression without compromising the metal's structural integrity. Punching and drifting operations created holes and openings in metal without removing material, a technique that maintained the metal's fiber structure and strength. Punches, typically made from high-carbon steel and carefully hardened, created initial openings that were then expanded using drifts, tapered tools that gradually enlarged holes to the desired size. This process required precise temperature control, as metal that was too hot would tear, while metal that was too cold would crack under the stress. The technique of forge welding allowed blacksmiths to join separate pieces of iron or steel into unified structures. This process demanded exceptional skill and timing, as the surfaces to be joined had to reach precisely the right temperature, hot enough to fuse, but not so hot as to burn or create weakness. Flux, often made from sand or borax, helped remove impurities and facilitated the welding process by creating a protective atmosphere around the joint. Twisting operations created both decorative elements and functional improvements in iron work. Twisted bars possessed greater strength than straight ones due to the altered grain structure, while twisted decorative elements added visual interest to gates, railings, and architectural features. The twisting process required careful planning, as the operation had to be completed while the metal remained at the proper working temperature. Heat treatment represented perhaps the most complex aspect of blacksmithing, requiring deep understanding of metallurgy principles that were often learned through generations of trial and error. The process of normalizing, heating steel to a specific temperature and allowing it to cool slowly, relieved internal stresses and refined the grain structure. Annealing, which involved controlled heating and cooling cycles, softened hardened steel for easier machining or further working. Tempering, the final step in heat treatment, involved carefully reheating hardened steel to specific temperatures indicated by color changes in the metal surface. Straw yellow indicated temperatures suitable for cutting tools, while deep blue suggested proper tempering for springs and flexible implements. This process required exceptional visual acuity and timing, as overheating could ruin hours of careful work in seconds. The blacksmith's ability to read metal, understanding its condition, temperature, and readiness for various operations, separated masters from apprentices. Experienced smiths could determine working temperature by color, assess the metal's readiness for welding by observing spark patterns, and predict potential problems by feeling the metal's response to hammer blows. This intuitive knowledge, developed over years of practice, represented the true artistry of the blacksmith's craft. The social hierarchy of medieval society placed blacksmiths in a unique position that defied simple categorization. Unlike peasants bound to the land or nobles born to privilege, smiths occupied a middle ground that was both respected and scrutinized. Their position in society was complex, shaped by the essential nature of their work, the mystery surrounding their craft, and the economic power they wielded through their monopoly on metal working. The rigid class structure of medieval Europe, blacksmiths were typically classified as artisans or craftsmen, placing them above common laborers, but below merchants, and certainly below the nobility. This classification, however, failed to capture the true complexity of their social standing. A skilled blacksmith in a prosperous town might own property, employ apprentices, and wield considerable influence in local affairs, while a village smith might struggle to maintain his position above the peasantry. The blacksmith's social status was intrinsically tied to the community's dependence on his services. In rural areas, the local smith was often one of the few individuals who could read and write, making him a valuable member of the community beyond his metalworking abilities. He served as a keeper of knowledge, a source of news from traveling merchants, and often as an informal counselor to those seeking advice. This intellectual component of his role elevated his status considerably above that of common laborers. The mystery and almost magical nature of metalworking contributed significantly to the blacksmith's social position. The transformation of raw ore into useful tools seemed miraculous to medieval minds, and this perceived connection to supernatural forces both elevated and isolated smiths within their communities. Some viewed them with reverence, others with suspicion, but few regarded them with indifference. The guild system that emerged during the High Middle Ages fundamentally transformed the blacksmith's place in society. These professional associations, which began appearing in the 11th and 12th centuries, provided structure, protection, and regulation to the metalworking trades. The formation of blacksmith guilds marked a crucial evolution from individual craftsmen working in isolation to organized professional bodies wielding collective power. Guild membership was not merely a professional affiliation, but a comprehensive social identity that governed nearly every aspect of a blacksmith's life. The guild determined who could practice the trade, how they could practice it, what they could charge for their services, and even whom they could marry. This level of control was both protective and restrictive, ensuring quality and fair competition while limiting individual freedom and innovation. The process of joining a blacksmith guild was elaborate and expensive, designed to maintain exclusivity and ensure competence. A prospective member typically needed to complete a lengthy apprenticeship, demonstrate mastery through the creation of a masterpiece, pay substantial fees, and often provide proof of legitimate birth and good character. These requirements effectively created barriers that prevented many skilled smiths from achieving full guild membership. Within the guild structure, blacksmiths were organized into distinct hierarchies that reflected their skill levels and social standing. At the bottom were apprentices, young men bound to master smiths for periods of 7 to 9 years. These apprentices received food, lodging, and training in exchange for their labor, but they had no independent rights within the guild and could not practice the trade on their own. Above apprentices were journeymen, skilled workers who had completed their apprenticeships but had not yet achieved master status. Journeymen could work for wages and move between different workshops, but they remained under the authority of master smiths and could not establish their own businesses or take on apprentices. This intermediate status could last for years or even decades, as becoming a master required not only skill, but also significant financial resources. Master smiths occupied the pinnacle of the guild hierarchy, enjoying the right to operate independent workshops, employ apprentices and journeymen, and participate in guild governance. However, even among masters, there were significant variations in wealth, influence, and social standing. A master who specialized in fine weapons or decorative work might achieve considerable prosperity, while one who focused on basic agricultural tools might struggle to maintain his position. The guild system provided numerous benefits to its members, including protection from unfair competition, standardized pricing, quality control, and mutual support during times of hardship. Guilds maintained funds to support members who became ill or injured, provided for widows and orphans, and offered a social network that extended far beyond professional concerns. Guild halls served as meeting places, social centers, and symbols of collective identity and pride. Guild regulations were extensive and detailed, covering everything from the quality of materials used to the hours of operation and the treatment of apprentices. These rules were enforced through a system of inspections, fines, and penalties that could include suspension or expulsion from the guild. The goal was to maintain high standards and protect the reputation of the trade, but the effect was often to stifle innovation and limit individual expression. The economic power of blacksmith guilds was considerable, particularly in urban centers where metalworking was essential to commerce and industry. Guilds could negotiate collectively with suppliers, coordinate responses to economic challenges, and influence local politics through their economic importance. In some cities, guild masters held positions on town councils and played significant roles in municipal governance. However, the guild system also created tensions and conflicts within the blacksmithing community. The emphasis on tradition and conformity often clashed with individual ambition and innovation. Young smiths with new ideas or techniques might find themselves constrained by guild regulations, while established masters might resist changes that threatened their positions. These tensions sometimes erupted into open conflicts that divided communities and weakened the guild system. The relationship between guilds and secular authorities was complex and often contentious. While guilds provided valuable services and tax revenue, Their monopolistic practices and resistance to outside interference sometimes brought them into conflict with royal officials and local governments. Kings and nobles occasionally granted charters that challenged guild privileges, leading to prolonged legal battles and political maneuvering. Regional variations in guild organization and power were significant, reflecting local economic conditions, political structures, and cultural traditions. In some areas, blacksmith guilds were powerful and influential organizations that dominated local metalworking, while in others, they were weak associations with limited authority. These differences affected the social status and economic opportunities available to smiths in different regions. The guild system's impact on technological development was profound but ambiguous. While guilds preserved traditional techniques and maintained quality standards, they also resisted innovations that might disrupt established practices or threaten existing economic arrangements. This conservative tendency sometimes slowed the adoption of new technologies and techniques, potentially limiting the advancement of metalworking arts. As medieval society evolved, so too did the position of blacksmiths within the social hierarchy. The growth of towns and cities created new opportunities for skilled metalworkers, while the increasing complexity of warfare and agriculture demanded more sophisticated tools and weapons. These changes gradually elevated the status of blacksmiths, particularly those who could adapt to new demands and technologies. The social status of blacksmiths was also influenced by their relationships with other crafts and professions. Smiths often worked closely with carpenters, masons, and other artisans, creating networks of mutual dependence and cooperation. These professional relationships sometimes extended into social connections, with intermarriage between craft families creating complex webs of obligation and support. Despite their essential role in medieval society, blacksmiths faced constant challenges to their social position. Economic downturns, political upheavals, and technological changes could quickly undermine their status and prosperity. The guild system provided some protection against these threats, but it could not eliminate the fundamental uncertainties that characterized medieval life. The legacy of the medieval guild system extended far beyond the Middle Ages, influencing the development of modern labor organizations and professional associations. The principles of collective bargaining, quality control, and mutual support that characterized blacksmith guilds became foundational elements of later industrial and professional organizations, demonstrating the enduring relevance of these medieval institutions. The products emerging from medieval forges represented the backbone of civilization itself. Each hammer blow shaped not merely metal, but the very foundations of daily life, warfare, and economic prosperity. Agricultural tools formed the cornerstone of blacksmith production. The plow, that revolutionary implement which transformed human civilization, required masterful craftsmanship. Medieval plowshares demanded specific angles and tempers to slice through various soil types. The blacksmith would forge these from wrought iron, carefully controlling the carbon content to achieve the perfect balance between hardness and flexibility. Scythes represented another agricultural marvel. These curved blades, extending 3 to 4 feet in length, required precise hammering to achieve their characteristic shape. The blacksmith would heat long iron bars to white-hot temperatures, then carefully bend and forge them around specially shaped anvil horns. The cutting edge received particular attention, with repeated heating, hammering, and quenching to create a razor-sharp finish capable of slicing through grain stalks with minimal effort. Horseshoes emerged as perhaps the most standardized blacksmith product. Each shoe required specific measurements and nail holes positioned with mathematical precision. The blacksmith would begin with a bar of iron, heating it to malleability before shaping it around a specialized anvil called a bick iron. The heel and toe required different thicknesses, with the heel slightly thicker to accommodate the horse's natural gait. 8 nail holes, precisely positioned and countersunk, allowed for secure attachment without damaging the hoof. Kitchen implements showcased the blacksmith's versatility. Knives ranged from simple eating utensils to complex cooking tools. The blacksmith would forge the blade from high-carbon steel, creating a sharp cutting edge, then weld it to a softer iron spine for flexibility. Handles required careful consideration, with the tang extending deep into wooden or bone grips, secured with rivets or binding. Cooking pots presented unique challenges. Large cauldrons, capable of feeding entire households, required enormous amounts of iron and exceptional skill. The blacksmith would begin with flat iron sheets, heating them to red-hot temperatures before hammering them over specially shaped forms. The bottom required particular thickness to withstand direct flame contact, while the sides needed careful shaping to prevent weak points where cracks might develop. Locks and keys represented the pinnacle of medieval blacksmith artistry. These intricate mechanisms required precision engineering centuries before the Industrial Revolution. The blacksmith would forge each component separately, creating springs, tumblers, and casings with tolerances measured in fractions of inches. Keys required matching precision, with each tooth and groove carefully filed to interact with specific lock mechanisms. Armor production elevated blacksmithing to an art form. A complete suit of plate armor required hundreds of individual pieces, each shaped to protect specific body parts while allowing natural movement. The blacksmith would begin with flat iron sheets, heating and hammering them over specially shaped stakes and forms. Articulated joints demanded particular expertise, with overlapping plates designed to flex while maintaining protective coverage. Helmets showcased specialized techniques. The great bassinet, popular among knights, required the blacksmith to shape a single piece of steel into a complex three-dimensional form. This process, called raising, involved hundreds of carefully placed hammer blows, gradually stretching and shaping the metal from the inside out. The visor presented additional challenges, requiring hinges and breathing holes positioned with mathematical precision. Weapons production carried enormous responsibility. Swords, the ultimate expression of medieval craftsmanship, required mastery of multiple techniques. The blacksmith would begin with high-quality steel, carefully controlling its carbon content through repeated heating and folding. The blade required differential hardening, with the cutting edge hardened to maintain sharpness, while the spine remained flexible to prevent breaking. Crossbow bolts, though smaller than swords, demanded equal precision. Each bolt required perfect balance and aerodynamic properties. The blacksmith would forge the point from high-carbon steel, creating a needle-sharp tip capable of penetrating armor. The socket, which attached to the wooden shaft, required precise dimensions to ensure proper fit and flight characteristics. Building hardware represented a massive portion of blacksmith production. Hinges, essential for doors and gates, required careful attention to bearing surfaces and pin alignment. The blacksmith would forge each leaf separately, creating the knuckles through careful bending and shaping. The pin, though simple in appearance, required precise diameter and length to ensure smooth operation over decades of use. Nails, seemingly simple products, actually required considerable skill. Medieval nails were forged individually, with the blacksmith creating the shank through careful drawing, and the head through upsetting techniques. Different applications required different nail types, from small finishing nails for delicate work to massive spikes for ship construction. Church hardware demanded both functionality and artistic beauty. Elaborate door handles, decorative hinges, and ornamental ironwork required the blacksmith to master artistic techniques alongside practical skills. These pieces often incorporated religious symbolism, with crosses, vines, and other motifs carefully forged into the metal. Tools for other craftsmen represented a specialized market. Chisels for stonemasons required specific steel compositions and edge geometries. Plain irons for woodworkers demanded exceptional sharpness and durability. Each tool required understanding of its intended use and the stresses it would encounter. The blacksmith's own tools represented perhaps the most critical products. Hammers, tongs, and anvils required exceptional quality, as any failure could halt production entirely. These tools were often passed down through generations, their quality improving with age and use as the metalwork hardened and developed patina. Measuring instruments showcased the blacksmith's precision capabilities. Calipers, used for measuring thickness and diameter, required perfectly matched legs and smooth pivot action. Squares, essential for checking right angles, demanded mathematical precision in their construction. Each product emerging from the medieval forge represented hours of skilled labor, generations of accumulated knowledge, and the transformation of raw materials into civilization's building blocks. The blacksmith's hammer shaped not merely iron and steel, but the very foundation of medieval society itself. The economic reality of medieval blacksmithing was far more complex than the romanticized image of a prosperous craftsman suggests. Most blacksmiths lived in a precarious balance between subsistence and modest comfort, their fortunes tied directly to the agricultural cycles and political stability of their communities. A typical village blacksmith might earn the equivalent of a skilled agricultural worker, but with significant variations throughout the year. During harvest season, when tools needed constant repair and replacement, income could surge dramatically. However, the long winter months often brought financial hardship, as farmers had little need for new implements and even less coin to spare. The blacksmith's income came from multiple sources, each with its own seasonal patterns and economic pressures. Tool repair formed the backbone of most smiths' earnings, providing steady but modest income throughout the working seasons. A simple plow repair might earn a day's wages, while crafting a new plowshare could provide a week's income. Horseshoeing represented another crucial revenue stream, particularly for smiths located near major roads or in larger settlements. A single horse required new shoes every 6 to 8 weeks, and the process demanded both skill and speed. The blacksmith would heat the iron, shape it to the horse's hoof, and nail it in place, all while managing a potentially dangerous animal. The cost of materials represented a constant challenge for medieval blacksmiths. Iron ore had to be purchased from merchants or mined locally, requiring significant upfront investment. Charcoal, essential for maintaining the high temperatures needed for metalworking, consumed enormous quantities and required either personal production or costly purchases from charcoal burners. Coal, where available, offered some economic advantages over charcoal, burning hotter and longer. However, coal was expensive and not readily available in many regions. The transition from charcoal to coal represented a significant economic decision, requiring new equipment and techniques, while promising greater efficiency and potentially higher profits. The guild system, where it existed, provided both economic protection and restriction for blacksmiths. Guild membership offered access to exclusive markets, price controls, and mutual support during difficult times. However, guild fees, regulations, and restrictions on competition could limit individual economic freedom and innovation. Apprenticeship represented both an economic burden and investment for established blacksmiths. Taking on an apprentice meant providing food, shelter, and training for several years before receiving any meaningful contribution to the workshop's productivity. However, successful apprentices eventually became valuable assistants and potential successors. The economic relationship between blacksmiths and their communities was deeply intertwined with local agricultural cycles. During planting season, demand for tools and repairs surged as farmers prepared their equipment. Harvest time brought another wave of activity as worn tools required immediate attention to prevent costly delays. Payment often came in the form of barter rather than coin, particularly in rural areas where monetary currency remained scarce. A blacksmith might accept grain, livestock, or other goods in exchange for services. This barter system required careful negotiation and storage capabilities, as perishable goods had to be consumed or traded quickly. The seasonal nature of agricultural work meant that blacksmiths had to carefully manage their finances throughout the year. Income earned during busy seasons had to sustain the household through leaner periods. This required not only financial discipline, but also the ability to diversify income sources during slower months. Many blacksmiths supplemented their metalworking income through other activities. Some worked as farmers themselves, maintaining small plots of land to provide food security. Others engaged in related trades, such as tool making, locksmithing, or even basic carpentry when metal work was scarce. The location of a blacksmith's workshop significantly impacted economic prospects. Smiths situated near major trade routes or in growing towns had access to more diverse clientele and higher-paying specialized work. Rural smiths, while serving essential community needs, often struggled with limited markets and lower overall income. Economic competition varied greatly depending on location and specialization. In larger towns, multiple blacksmiths might compete for the same customers, driving down prices and forcing specialization. Rural smiths often enjoyed local monopolies, but faced the challenge of limited market size and customer purchasing power. The investment required to establish a blacksmith shop represented a significant economic barrier. Beyond the basic tools and anvil, a smith needed to construct or rent appropriate workspace, acquire raw materials, and build relationships with suppliers and customers. This startup cost often required family support or apprenticeship savings. Debt was a constant concern for many medieval blacksmiths. The need to purchase expensive raw materials before completing and selling finished products created cash flow challenges. Extended credit terms with suppliers were common, but created vulnerability to economic downturns or customer defaults. The economic status of blacksmiths within medieval society placed them in the middle ranks of the social hierarchy. They earned more than common laborers, but less than merchants or skilled artisans in luxury trades. This position provided some economic security while limiting opportunities for significant wealth accumulation. Economic records from medieval periods, though incomplete, suggest that successful blacksmiths could achieve modest prosperity. They might own their workshops, maintain small livestock, and provide basic education for their children. However, true wealth remained elusive for most practitioners of the trade. The economic impact of warfare on blacksmiths was complex and varied. While military conflicts created demand for weapons and armor, they also disrupted trade routes, destroyed communities, and diverted resources from peaceful pursuits. Some smiths prospered during wartime, while others faced economic devastation. Tax obligations represented another significant economic burden for medieval blacksmiths. They owed taxes to local lords, religious institutions, and sometimes royal authorities. These obligations were often calculated based on estimated income or property value, creating additional financial pressure during already difficult periods. The economic legacy of medieval blacksmiths extended far beyond their individual circumstances. Their work supported the entire agricultural economy, enabling the food production that sustained medieval civilization. Without their skills and services, the complex social and economic structures of medieval society would have been impossible to maintain. Understanding the economic realities of medieval blacksmithing reveals the complex interplay between individual skill, community needs, and broader economic forces. These craftsmen navigated a challenging economic landscape with remarkable resilience, adapting to seasonal variations, market fluctuations, and social changes, while maintaining the essential services their communities required. The hammer falls silent, the forge grows cold, but the legacy of medieval blacksmiths echoes through centuries. These craftsmen, who toiled in smoke and flame, shaped not just metal, but the very foundation of human civilization. In the grand tapestry of history, blacksmiths occupy a unique position. They were neither noble nor peasant, but something in between skilled artisans whose expertise commanded respect across all social boundaries. When a lord needed armor, a farmer required tools, or a merchant sought quality goods, all roads led to the blacksmith's forge. The technological innovations born in medieval smithies would ripple forward through time. The blast furnace, perfected in the 12th century, revolutionized iron production. What once required days of careful work could now be accomplished in hours. The quality of steel improved dramatically, leading to stronger plowshares that could break tougher soil, opening new agricultural frontiers. Consider the water wheel-powered trip hammer, introduced in the 13th century. This mechanical marvel multiplied human strength tenfold, allowing smiths to work larger pieces of iron and create more complex shapes. The rhythmic pounding of these great hammers became the heartbeat of medieval industry, a sound that would eventually evolve into the machinery of the Industrial Revolution. The guild system, pioneered by blacksmiths and other craftsmen, established principles of quality control and professional standards that persist today. The concept of apprenticeship, with its structured progression from novice to master, became the foundation for technical education. Modern trade schools, professional certifications, and even university programs trace their lineage back to the medieval guild hall. Medieval blacksmiths also pioneered concepts of specialization that would define modern manufacturing. The armorer who focused solely on defensive equipment, the toolmaker who perfected agricultural implements, the locksmith who mastered security devices. Each represented a step toward the specialized production that characterizes contemporary industry. The social mobility that blacksmithing offered was revolutionary for its time. In an age when birth determined destiny, the forge provided one of the few paths for advancement through skill and dedication. A peasant's son could become a master smith, earning respect and prosperity through the strength of his arm and the quality of his work. This meritocratic aspect of blacksmithing helped lay the groundwork for later social changes. The idea that expertise and hard work could elevate one's station challenged the rigid hierarchies of feudalism. Successful smiths accumulated wealth, purchased property, and sometimes even achieved minor nobility through their craft. The international nature of smithing knowledge also contributed to cultural exchange. Techniques developed in Damascus steelmaking traveled to Toledo. Spanish methods reached Germanic lands, and innovations spread along trade routes. This cross-pollination of ideas helped break down regional barriers and contributed to the gradual unification of European technology. Medieval blacksmiths preserved and transmitted knowledge through dark periods of history. During times of war, plague, and social upheaval, the forge remained a constant. Smiths maintained the technical knowledge necessary for civilization to function, passing down techniques through generations of apprentices, even when formal education collapsed. The written records kept by guild masters represent some of our earliest technical documentation. These carefully guarded secrets, eventually compiled into treatises and manuals, became the foundation for scientific metallurgy. The empirical knowledge gained through countless hours at the forge would later be codified into the principles of material science. The environmental impact of medieval smithing also shaped historical development. The massive consumption of charcoal led to widespread deforestation, forcing societies to develop new fuel sources and conservation methods. This environmental pressure contributed to the eventual adoption of coal and the development of more efficient furnaces. The urban planning of medieval cities often centered around smithies and their needs. The location of forges, with their requirements for water, fuel, and transportation, influenced the layout of entire settlements. Many modern European cities still bear the imprint of medieval industrial planning, with old smithy districts identifiable by their street names and architectural remnants. The economic principles developed around blacksmithing also had lasting impact. The concept of paying for quality, the importance of reputation in business, and the value of skilled labor all emerged from the medieval smithy. These ideas would later influence the development of capitalism and modern market economics. Perhaps most significantly, medieval blacksmiths embodied the human drive to transform raw materials into useful objects. This fundamental impulse to take what nature provides and improve upon it through skill and ingenuity defines human technological progress. Every modern factory, every precision tool, every engineered component traces its conceptual ancestry back to the medieval forge. The psychological impact of blacksmithing on medieval society cannot be understated. The sight of a skilled smith transforming crude iron into elegant tools or weapons seemed almost magical to contemporary observers. This mastery over the elements elevated smiths to an almost mythical status, inspiring legends and folklore that persist today. The seasonal rhythms of smithing work also influenced broader social patterns. The busy periods before planting and harvest, the winter months devoted to repair and maintenance, the spring rush for new tools, these cycles synchronized entire communities around the needs of metalworking. Agricultural societies organized their calendars partly around the availability of the blacksmith services. The decline of traditional blacksmithing in the late medieval period marked a turning point in human history. As water-powered machinery and early industrial processes began to replace hand forging, society moved toward mass production and standardization. The intimate relationship between craftsman and creation began to dissolve, replaced by the efficiency of mechanized production. Yet the values embodied by medieval blacksmiths, dedication to craft, pride in workmanship, the pursuit of perfection through practice, remain relevant today. In an age of mass production and digital technology, the medieval smith's commitment to quality and personal responsibility for one's work offers timeless lessons. The tools created by medieval blacksmiths, many of which survive in museums and private collections, stand as testament to their skill and dedication. These artifacts, forged centuries ago, often surpass modern equivalents in durability and craftsmanship. They remind us that true quality transcends time and technology. As we trace the evolution from medieval forge to modern factory, we see not just technological progress, but the continuous human story of innovation, adaptation, and the eternal quest to shape the world through skilled hands and determined will. As we reach the end of our journey through the medieval blacksmith's world, let us take a moment to reflect on the profound transformation we've witnessed. From the first spark struck in a cold forge at dawn, to the final hammer blow that shaped a piece of iron into something useful. We've walked alongside these craftsmen through their daily struggles and triumphs. The blacksmith's life was one of constant contradiction. They wielded fire and iron with the skill of artists, yet their hands were perpetually stained with soot and scarred by burns. They created the tools that built civilizations, yet they themselves often lived on the margins of society, respected for their skills, but feared for their association with the mysterious forces of transformation. Think of young Thomas, whom we met at the beginning of our tale, struggling to keep his master's forge burning through those long winter nights. His calloused hands told the story of countless hours spent learning to read the subtle colors of heated metal, to understand the temperament of different irons, to coax strength from raw materials through patience and persistence. The rhythm of the hammer against anvil was more than just the sound of work being done. It was the heartbeat of medieval society, the steady pulse that kept communities functioning. Every nail that held a roof together, every horseshoe that carried a knight into battle, every plow that turned the soil for next year's harvest began as a formless piece of iron in a blacksmith's forge. We've seen how these craftsmen rose before dawn, their breath visible in the cold air as they coaxed life back into yesterday's embers. We've watched them work through the heat of summer days, sweat streaming down their faces as they labored over forges that turned their workshops into furnaces. We've observed their careful attention to apprentices, passing down knowledge that had been accumulated over generations. The Blacksmiths' Guild was more than just a professional organization. It was a family, a support system, a keeper of ancient wisdom. When a smith fell ill, his brothers in the craft would ensure his forge remained lit. When a young apprentice showed promise, the entire community would invest in his development. When innovation emerged, it was shared freely among those who understood its value. But perhaps most importantly, we've discovered that the blacksmith's true strength lay not in his powerful arms or his ability to withstand heat, but in his capacity to see potential where others saw only raw material. A twisted piece of iron could become a delicate hinge. A lump of steel could transform into a sword blade that would serve a warrior for decades. The medieval blacksmith understood something that we sometimes forget in our modern world. That creation requires destruction. That strength comes from being tested by fire. That the most beautiful and useful things often emerge from the most challenging circumstances. Every piece they forged had to endure the violence of hammer blows, the searing heat of the forge, the shock of cold water during quenching. As you drift toward sleep tonight, let the steady rhythm of the blacksmith's hammer carry you into peaceful dreams. Imagine the warm glow of the forge, the satisfying ring of metal on metal, the quiet pride of a craftsman who has shaped something useful from raw materials. Feel the weight of tradition, the comfort of routine, the deep satisfaction that comes from work well done. The blacksmith's day began in darkness, and often ended the same way. But the light of his forge illuminated not just his workshop, but the entire fabric of medieval society. In their patient, methodical work, we find a meditation on the value of persistence, the beauty of craftsmanship, and the quiet dignity of those who build the world one hammer blow at a time. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle sounds of a medieval forge, where time moves slowly, and every creation is born from fire, patience, and skilled hands.